Hi, everyone. My name is Elisheva, and I'm so excited to be giving the Devar this morning, especially because I get to talk about the Akedah, or binding of Isaac, which we just heard chanted so beautifully by Phil. On the second day of Rosh HaShanah, we read about the binding of Isaac, or the Akedah in Hebrew. The story goes like this. God calls out to Abraham one day, and Abraham responds with perfect humility. He says, Hineni, I am here. In Musar, which I actually will be teaching some Musar at some point this year, Hineni is known as an expression of excellent humility, perfect humility. God tells Abraham to sacrifice his beloved son at Mount Moriah, and Abraham does so. He binds Isaac upon the altar and raises his hand, and then an angel rushes down and tells him he should not kill his son, for this was only a test. Now God knows that Abraham is faithful to him above all else. Throughout this, Isaac is bound. The story confounds me, and I know I am not alone in this as a rabbinical student who read a lot of commentary. Simply thinking about it can make me uneasy, angry, and grief-stricken, all in one. I am scared by Abraham's actions, and that I am meant to find them righteous, and even more so, I am scared of God's actions, and that I am meant to trust the God in this story. That God would test someone by asking if they would commit violence, and violence against a beloved child horrifies me. That the act was not completed hardly matters to me. Isaac had no choice in this matter, and again, Abraham agreed. In the aftermath of the Akedah, the Torah tells us that Abraham goes down Mount Moriah and meets up with his servants, but it does not mention Isaac. In fact, Isaac himself is absent for another several years of the narrative, and his voice is mostly absent in the Akedah. The only mention of it we get is the question he asks his father, where are we getting the sacrifice? And it's unclear if he understands whether or not that he is going to be the sacrifice. But ultimately, my question is this. After the Akedah, after being bound to an altar and nearly killed, where does Isaac go? The rabbis tell so many stories to make sense of this. And I also want to think about what is Isaac's experience of this event. It's clearly potentially traumatic. Isaac is bound and his father hovers over him with a knife to kill him. Shalom Spiegel, in his book, The Last Trial, says that scripture regards Isaac as though he had died, his ashes laid upon the altar for eternity. I personally like to call Isaac the forgotten founding father. He isn't positioned as a protagonist in Torah in either the way that Abraham or Jacob are. In fact, one reason of why Isaac is not mentioned as having gone down the mountain, as not having need to be mentioned that he went down the mountain, is because he actually went down with Abraham. But we only need to say that Abraham didn't, as he is the central and primary figure. Unlike both his father and his son, Isaac does not undergo a name change. It is also unclear if Isaac ever has a direct encounter with the divine again, unlike both his father and his son. But where did Isaac go? One midrash says that he went to study Torah at the great house of Shem and Ever for 3 years. Another midrash says that Abraham sent him home to Hebron to tell Sarah the good news that he was still alive. There are several other midrashim that fascinate me that I'm going to go through this. The first says this: Isaac stayed on Mount Moriah for 3 years. Where did Isaac go? Isaac did not leave the place where he was nearly killed. He did not go anywhere at all. I've worked with survivors of domestic and sexual violence for years, and I've had my own experiences with hardship and loss. This version of Isaac resonates with me. He stays where he is. There is a shock that comes when experiencing what other people, especially those who love us or claim to love us, hurt us. Sometimes it is easiest and also best not to move from that place of pain too quickly. There are other possible answers to this question, though. Where did Isaac go? Another midrash says that God brought Isaac, the dead man walking, to the Garden of Eden for 3 years. This idea is powerful to me. God brings Isaac to heal, to a place of miracles. This fantasy is comforting and reassuring. It also speaks of the deep needs and wounds post-trauma. Isaac is allowed to go where humans are no longer welcome, in a place where his needs are met. Isaac can heal. A third answer. Isaac lagged behind. He was injured because he had been bound. Of course, Isaac was injured on this day, but this midrash I found was the most explicit about that fact. Perhaps his arms were cut as he was bound to the altar. Perhaps his legs were harmed. Perhaps his soul was. And what of Isaac telling his own story? There is even less midrash on this. I turn instead to a poem by Myra Sklu, which is not turning up on my iPad, so I have to open my phone right now. Sorry, folks. So this is, I chose this poem by Myra Sklu because it was the only one I could find where Isaac speaks in first person. Isaac, I want to transcend what is said about me, to let you see another way it might have gone. You stand in your own age and judge me, my passivity before my father, before the blade and the fire. And you wonder why I did not return home that day with my father Abraham and his 2 young men. There are some mysteries that are lost, some contexts that not be given. You must imagine where I was that day. For one who has escaped for a moment death's journey to the unknown, no matter the righteous cause, it is no ordinary path, this return. It would not do to come home and act as I had before, act as if nothing had happened. Perhaps I went to the Dead Sea to wash myself the shadow that passed over me at Moriah. Perhaps I lay back in those waters and counted the days of my life that were left of me then, or considered what was asked of me. This year and last, I found myself fascinated with Isaac, his voice lost in the narrative. As a feminist, I always look for characters whose voices are silenced, especially voices of those who experience harm in our world. And as myself, I too want to think through these questions. Where have I been hurt? Who am I now? Where do I go? How do I heal? Where did Isaac go? We honestly don't know, but we can choose where we go next. Whether we heal in the place of pain, the place of magic, or on our way to the next stop, I'm wishing that all of us who need healing, in spirit or in body, can figure out where we need to go next. Shana Tova.